Tesla driving around Silicon Valley? And I don't mean the one out there, because that means you've all seen multiple Teslas, right? I saw 10, I counted today, and I have a short commute. So, that dream has become reality. And what Tesla has done has been a marvel to watch. So I think a lot of folks here, business students, friends of the firm, are really curious on how this all works. And so if we could start with some design questions and then some organizational and people kinds of questions. But starting with design, as you think about the big problems in the world that you are addressing, do you start with a particular product in mind, like there could be this Model S, there could be this Falcon 9, and then think, how do I get there? Or do you start with saying, there's something broken in the world, and I'm going to fix it, and I'm going to commit to do it, even if I don't know how I get there?
Sure. So let's see.
Is that on?
Yeah, it seems to be good. In the case of Tesla, SpaceX, and SolarCity, and actually also the PayPal and the Zip2 before that, it really stemmed from when I was in college. I was trying to think what would most affect the future in a very likely to be a positive way. So the three areas where I was quite sure would be positive were sustainable energy, internet, and making life multiplanetary. And then there were a couple other areas where it's maybe a question mark, like AI and writing genetics.
And what was the last one?
Yeah, rewriting genetics.
Rewriting genetics. Oh.
Yeah. So just have big impact.
It's good to know where phase 3 and 4 might come. Yeah.
Potentially negative consequences, hopefully positive, but something could go wrong.
So did you have like a rank order, like was the top 3 and a couple of contenders, or were they all kind of jumbling around, waiting for the right moment?
I just thought, if you look ahead and say what's really going to have an important effect on the future of humanity as a whole, those were the 5 areas that I could come up with standing in the shower, basically.
So there's this moment of epiphany that you held for a while, because you didn't pursue those right away, right? This was sort of an early vision that you then got opportunities to execute on.
Yeah.
So maybe if we pick an example like Tesla going towards the Model S or SpaceX going towards the Falcon 9, do you commit the team, yourself, your resources to that endeavor, now a little farther along, when you have the end point in mind, or just let's say the cost of goods analysis for the rocket, or gosh, EVs should be better than internal combustion engines, just in general, I'll commit. I'll believe that should be done.
Yeah, I didn't really get into any of this with the expectation of success, or at least, yeah. I started out with thinking, okay, I'm going to do something in the electric vehicle space, and that's why I originally came to Stanford, was to work on advanced energy storage technologies, in particular ultracapacitors. So that was continuing on research that I'd done as an intern in Silicon Valley in the summer prior. So that's why I originally came out in '95. And then during that summer, I wrote some internet software, and I thought, okay, I can either work on electric vehicle technology, or I could sort of work on internet stuff. Try to do something with the internet. And I thought the internet would be something that would dramatically affect the future of humanity. It would be like acquiring a nervous system. And whereas previously communication would have to occur almost by osmosis, from one person to another, or slowly through telephone or mail or something like that. But now, if you have a nervous system, any part of the sort of human collective can know about any other part instantly. And previously you'd have to be at the sort of Library of Congress, even to have the Library of Congress as sort of information. But with everything digitized and access anywhere, you could be in a jungle in South America, and if you had just an internet link somehow, you'd have access to all of humanity's information. So it would actually effectively create a superorganism and fundamentally change the nature of humanity itself. So I just want to be kind of part of that.
Is that the path to AI that you might see?
It's actually not exactly AI. It's some sort of human-machine collective intelligence. So different from AI. Although AI may not turn out to be exactly what, hopefully not. It's not exactly what's like described in Terminator or something.
Now, a quick pause for those who haven't been to SpaceX. The data center has got to be the coolest thing you've ever seen. It's Skynet on the door, Cyberdyne Systems branding and logoing, the most badass set of lights coming from all the linking servers. So you own it.
Exactly.
Right?
Our FBA and CFD cluster is called Cyberdyne Systems.
We'll get back to influences later on, but I want to try to see if I understand what you were saying about this. You see the long arc of, and what's important to humanity, not little problems, but huge problems that could be solved. A lot of us go around and we see something frustrating like traffic on the 405, and we just take it as, well, crap, government's screwed, what are we going to do, right? You have this incredible sort of scope of ambition, right? Planetary scope, interplanetary scope, right? Yeah. A little more than just changing the world, let's change some other worlds too, right? And this is big stuff. Was that always in your mind, or did you become more emboldened over time that this is available, we can do these things?
It definitely emboldened over time. I mean, when I started the first internet company, Zip2, with my brother and another person, Greg Curry, it wasn't really with the thought of being wealthy. I've got nothing against being wealthy, but
we'll get back to that later too.
but it's just it was just from the standpoint of wanting to be part of the internet, and I figured if we could make enough money to just get by, that would be okay. And when we started off, we literally only had like one computer, and so it would be our web server during the day, and I'd code at night. And we just got a small office in Palo Alto back when rent was not insane, and it cost us like $450 a month. It was cheaper than an apartment, so we actually just slept in the office and then showered at the YMCA on Page Mill, El Camino. So we'd walk over there and shower, and that was actually, I think that was when I first met you, by the way. So I don't know how many people, probably not many people know this, but we actually pitched Steve in like January '96 on the Zip2 business plan, and actually I thought. Steve was actually one of the most up to speed on what actually was in our business plan. Most of the people we met did not actually read our business plan. In fact, a lot of venture capitalists we met at the time didn't even know what the internet was. They'd never used it, and they didn't think it would amount to anything.
Still do.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm talking like sort of well-known people on Sand Hill. It was like, wow, okay. But at the time, nobody had made any money on the internet, so I guess that's. Then it wasn't really clear evidence that there was a business, yeah.
Those were fun times. I remember Kimball and you coming in.
Right.
Very young-looking guys. That's what I was. Yeah. I think I was in my first 4 months on the job too.
Yeah, exactly. So.
Let's switch gears for a sec. I've also had the great honor to work with Steve Jobs briefly, but enough, and as a business school student, to study him with as much scrutiny as I could during that period. And there's some obvious parallels. And so let's start with the most obvious, but just must be like the elephant in the room. Is the secret to your success to be the CEO of two companies at the same time?
No. I think it's...
Because look at the correlation.
Yeah.
Struggling companies, everything's in the craft can in December 2008, so let's take on a new CEO gig. And same for Steve, coming back to Apple. Right?
No, definitely it was not my intention to be CEO of two companies. There are certain things that I kind of wanted to... I thought were important to happen, and I thought it was important that there was... that an electric vehicle happened, that there was a success in the electric vehicle arena, because the incumbent companies were convinced that it was not possible to create an electric car that looked good, had a good range performance, and so forth, and that even if you did make such a car, it would not sell, because people had this love of gasoline, so we had to show that it was possible to create a compelling electric car, long range, good looking, all those things. That was a Tesla Roadster. And if you made such a thing, people would buy it, so that's what we try to do with Tesla. By the way, I should say, like one minor sort of some correction on the introduction. I'm not a co-founder of SolarCity, but I am a co-founder of Tesla.
That's okay. That's a good point.
So.
And product architect of many of its key features.
So,
very much like Jobs, both a hand in some of the detail as well as the long arc of what's important for the company. The quip, though, about being co-CEOs is more than just a joke, in that I wonder if, in ways that are hard to predict, and you wouldn't set out for this amount of work, it seems insane, but inevitably, both companies cannot expect more than half your time at most. It sort of naturally forces a delegation upon you and an expectation they have to rise up for partial awareness at best, right? Yeah. And I just wonder if that helps drive prioritization and really focusing on what's important a bit more than you otherwise might have to.
It probably does. Yeah, I think I'd probably do. Yeah, I mean, because I have to triage the things that I do at each company, and constantly think about what is the most useful thing that I could do. But even with that, it still actually does take an enormous amount of time. And for a while there, I was just doing constant 100-hour weeks, and that's definitely wearing. And now I'm kind of in the 80 to 90, which is more manageable. But that if you divide that by 2, it's only like maybe 45 hours per company, which is not much when there's a lot of things going on.
You're like a slacker. I mean,
yeah.
So it is interesting also how you have a love for certain aspects of the product. So at SpaceX, the whole concept and the vision of going to Mars, backing into features and stuff. It's a wonderful thing to see. I think what obviously should strike folks in the room as remarkable is the diversity of industries that you've tackled, right? From commercial banking to the military-industrial complex to the automotive industry. These are heavily regulated industries that generally investors flee from and startups routinely fail in, and they haven't seen much change for good reason over decades. So there might not be an obvious pattern in which industry you tend to thrive in, but I wonder if there's a pattern perhaps in process. Like, do you approach each of these perhaps the way a software architect might, to think of a different way to bring innovation, a different way to reset, from first principles perhaps instead of iterating from the past, a breakthrough? And is there a reason you end up in these otherwise really tough industries? I mean, I don't know if that's ever occurred to you, that you don't, even with Solar City going up against the regulated utilities, none of these are places that you would normally find entrepreneurs.
Yeah, like I said, it was not from the standpoint of like what's the best risk-adjusted rate of return, or where I think things could be successful. It's just like I think these things need to happen, try to make them happen, and certainly when we started SpaceX or Tesla, I thought the probability of success was less than 50%. Probably a fair bit less than 50%. In the case of Solar City, I thought the probability of success was probably greater than 50%, but it wasn't clear what the magnitude of success would be. It could just be small. But it was, I just thought these were things that needed to get done, and even if the money's lost, okay, it's still worth trying.
So you had conviction, but it didn't mean certainty, right? You knew that all vehicles would be electric in your heart, but not ultimately, that Tesla would necessarily succeed.
I mean, I think the sort of fundamental good that Tesla can accomplish is acceleration of the inevitable, which is electric transportation. But I think there's a lot of value to accelerating, even though I think it's somewhat inevitable. There's value to accelerating it to minimize the environmental and economic damage that would otherwise occur. So. It's better if we transition to sustainable transport 10 years or maybe 20 years sooner than might otherwise be the case. And I think the Tesla's effect has been much greater than the cars that's made internally, because when we announced the Tesla Roadster, then Bob Lutz, who was vice chairman of GM at the time, saw our press release and said, if a small company in California can do it, then so can GM. And he took it to his engineers, who told him that you couldn't build an electric car, and told them that they needed to get going. And that's what got the Volt rolling, and that in turn got Nissan to do the Leaf, and so it's kind of got things going. And ultimately, it's what we induce other companies to do that will have a greater impact than the cars we make ourselves.
It's an interesting point I'm going to come back to later, this idea that Tesla's founding mission is, as Elon has articulated from the very beginning through the most recent reports to the public, is to catalyze an industry shift that Tesla will be some part of, but to help others in that shift as well, which is remarkable.
Right. So we supply powertrains to Toyota and to Mercedes, for example.
To help what could be viewed as your biggest competitors one day,
absolutely.
To accelerate that. Before we get to that sort of purpose-driven mission, I do want to ask, or at least maybe make sure the audience realizes how cool this car is, and so Elon doesn't have to do this. In case you haven't been as much of a fan as the two of us, it's a bit unprecedented, the reviews it's received. Consumer Reports saying it's the best car they've ever tested. Road and Track saying it's the most important car in America's history. The safety testing showing it's the most safe car ever manufactured by far, including vans and SUVs. And so it's pretty remarkable to peg performance, desirability, safety, and all these parameters. So is it luck, or is there something particularly unique about the EV design space that let it be possible to build the best car?
Well, I think luck does play some role here, but I think electric vehicles have a fundamental architectural advantage. If one designs an electric vehicle from the ground up and takes advantage of what's possible, like if you just were to convert a gasoline car, you would not achieve these advantages. But if it's properly done, you can actually package the battery pack in the floor pan and achieve a low center of mass and have a very compact motor and inverter and gearbox, so that the actual usable space in the car is significantly greater than a gasoline car of the same overall external dimensions. And then if you do a few other things, which aren't necessarily specifically related to an electric car, like using an aluminum body and chassis is helpful because you can absorb more energy per unit mass, essentially, in a crash.
Like a crumple zone.
Yeah, exactly. But part of it's related to electric vehicle architecture, and part of it is related to other technical decisions that were made in the design of the Model S. That's what leads to sort of having a high safety I don't want to sort of go into too much detail because it might take up too much time, but like I wrote a blog piece.
Did you know some of those things at the get-go, or did they unveil themselves as you went along? I'm just curious how the vision materializes. For example, like along either the product dimensions, like it will have all these great features, like at the get-go, did it all gel? And then secondly, I'm also curious, when did you first know that all vehicles would be electric? Like, was that early?
It was probably 22 years ago, something like that.
Before you met Tesla?
Before
there was Tesla.
Way before there was Tesla. Oh yeah. Well, like I said,
wow.
When I originally came out, when I was studying physics at Penn, that's probably when I thought it was the case. Or maybe sooner than that. Probably when I was in my sophomore year in college.
And did you have certainty in your heart?
Yeah, absolutely. It's super obvious.
Yes, now it is. And there are some
I think
doubters.
it was super obvious then, but yeah.
This is what blows my mind, because even like 3 years ago, most people probably didn't agree with this point of view. And if I could be confident of any prediction I could make, it's that within 10 years, all people will be of this point of view. But we won't have made the transition yet, but we'll realize that it's a ridiculous debate to be having. You were a lone voice of sorts back then, probably amongst your cohort and friends and social connections.
Actually, I used to talk to dates about electric cars.
How'd that go?
It wasn't helpful.
It got better.
So actually, I ran into a girl I dated briefly in Canada, Christy Nicholson. She's now a writer for Scientific American, and she mentioned, when we went on a date, I asked her, "Do you ever think about electric cars?" And she said, "No, I don't." It was a while back. It's pretty. Almost everything's electric that we have in our daily lives.
Mm-hmm. So it was from the physics of it. The heat loss of an internal combustion engine. It's pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. So I want to share a little story that leads to a question along a different angle. I don't think you've heard this before, but I find it fascinating. I was at a lunch at a Google event, and out of the blue, with no expectation this would be a topic, Larry Page turned to me, knowing a little bit about our connection, and said, how much money do I have? And he mentioned a number. I thought that was cute, that he was trying to recall that. He goes, if I were to get hit by a bus today, I should leave all of it to Elon Musk.
Really?
Yeah.
He said that?
Yeah. And so I'm like, paper, pen. Can we please get this down on? Yes. So he likes zingers.
I know that, actually. He's a good friend of mine.
Mm-hmm. So context is important.
I met Larry before he got venture funding.
Oh, really?
So, yeah. So that's like 97
back in the garage
or something.
Days? Yep.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, he's a remarkable guy, obviously also an underachiever, and has a company that wants to do good in the world, right?
Yeah.
And I think he looks at you with a bit of envy, because what he then proceeded to say was, I could give my money to a nonprofit and a lot less would get done than a corporation that's pursuing things that are directly aligned with things I care about, like getting off of oil and colonizing other planets. He believes in those missions and thinks that a corporation, if endowed with the right to do that as its business purpose, is the best vehicle out there, and wishes he could do more of that in his own life. He compared poignantly, I think, to some other software companies in the Pacific Northwest who might have executives who do evil for the first part of the career, then do good for the second half, and then the sad story of others who never get to the second half of their life, like Steve Jobs. I mean, not in a joking way. I mean, seriously, and it was a very deep moment. So it raises the question of a purpose-driven business. So you've heard already that Tesla is not just trying to make money. That is not the priority. In fact, if you read the most recent shareholder letter, it says profits are not.
In fact, I started off the shareholder letter saying the profits are not our primary goal. And then I got a little bit of some of the board members who questioned that statement. And I was like, well, it's true, And
well, like for now, or like just while we're growing, but no, just not the priority, which I think in a business school is a really good point to dwell on for a moment.
Yeah, it's not that I think they're unimportant or anything. It's just not the primary goal.
That's right.
And I actually told people that on IPO as well. And so it's not like new information, or at least, if people had watched the IPO, it's not new information. And actually, amazingly, the stock went up after that.
I think there's a profound reason. I mean, you see the benefits of being focused on something that's a higher calling as your primary motivation. Your employees love it, the customers love it, partners love it, right? Yeah. And you feel better about your job. The interesting thing, the irony perhaps, is that, at least within our portfolio, the companies that have that kind of a founding principle actually make more profit and grow their revenue more quickly than the ones that don't. And now it's this low sample set, but the handful that have taken this bold of a step to say, no, that we will not make that our number one priority, actually do a great job. And it occurred to me, and I don't know if this was conscious in your head at some point, that if you weren't wildly profitable, the auto industry wouldn't follow you. In other words, this whole mission of catalyzing a shift to a new electric vehicle isn't going to work if the business model is worse than the current business model. And so it's the obvious byproduct of what you're focusing on. Well, not obvious, but it occurs to me that it's a byproduct. It wasn't obvious at first at all. But I'm curious if that thought occurred to you that, the profits will come. Or,
well, we have to generate positive cash flow, or we have to generate enough cash flow to fund future developments, which requires having a good gross margin. And so I guess one could just say, okay, well, we're going to stop developing new products, and then you would be really profitable. So at any given point, you could sort of say, well, we could be profitable, at this point in a significant way. But we've got these great things that we want to develop for the future, and they're a good investment, and that's what we're doing.
And similarly at SpaceX, the founding vision was to colonize Mars. Indirectly. Again, interestingly, catalyzing others to move. And then you realized, hey, I've got to actually lead this charge, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, with SpaceX, originally I started off just thinking, well, how do I increase NASA's budget? Actually, that was my goal. So it was like 2001 with just talking to a friend of mine, and he asked me what I was going to do after PayPal, and I thought, well, I was wondering, like, I'd like to get involved in space, but I just didn't think there was anything I could do as an individual. But I was curious as to when NASA would be sending a team to Mars, because that was always going to be the thing to do after the moon. I figured that there'd be some plan, and I'd just go to the website and I could read the schedule.
Then Mars occurs.
Oh yeah, it's like, okay, 2017, good, okay. But actually there wasn't anything on the website, and or at least I thought, like, can I not find it? Like, what's going on here? And is it secret? I don't know. But it turned out that that NASA had done a study on what it would cost to do a manned Mars mission, and this was under Bush the First, and in his first, he asked for a 90-day study shortly after taking office, and NASA came back with a $500 billion price tag. And he said, okay, maybe not.
Billion with a B.
That's when $500 billion was serious money for the government. So then that got totally shelved, and it was like you were not allowed to talk about any kind of crewed mission to Mars at NASA. anyway, but I thought, well, if I can do something that would galvanize public interest, and then that public interest would translate to additional appropriations for NASA and increase their budget, then maybe they could do it. So actually, what I sort of thinking I would do is send a small greenhouse to the surface of Mars with seeds in dehydrated gel, and then upon landing, hydrate the gel and grow the plants. And the public tends to respond to precedents and superlatives. So this would be the furthest that life's ever traveled, the first life on Mars, and you'd have this great shot of green plants on a red background. And I thought, okay, maybe that would get
the money shot. You got to beam
that be the money shot, yeah. I'm never quite sure whether that's a sort of a word you can use or not.
Now I'm realizing maybe I should.
Yeah, I didn't know its origins until somebody pointed it out to me, but.
Okay, moving back to that greenhouse on Mars. Yeah, so the photo is out there, and it inspires others.
So you get this great photo, and I thought, okay, well, if we could make this happen, this would be cool, and NASA would get the money, and they could sort of send a team to Mars, and it'd be great. So I tried to figure out how to do this with the proceeds that I had from PayPal. And I was able to figure out how to get the cost of the spacecraft down and the communications and the little greenhouse and everything. But the one thing I couldn't compress was the cost to launch, because there are only a few options. And the U.S. options were way too expensive. And so I ended up going to Russia 3 times to try to buy the biggest ICBM in the Russian nuclear fleet.
That's where I'd start, yeah.
Yeah.
Go big or go home, right? Yeah.
I mean, okay. There was some strange trips, that's for sure. But it's like virtually, like you can buy any. It's a very capitalist society in some ways. So I actually did negotiate a deal to buy 2 of the ICBMs minus the nukes. But I came to the conclusion after that 3rd trip that it wouldn't really matter. Like I actually came to the conclusion that my initial premise was wrong. Because I actually think there's a tremendous amount of will in the American population, particularly, to explore. The United States, maybe more than any other country, is a distillation of the human spirit of exploration, and it's really fundamental to psyche. So, if people think there's a way, I think it would actually get a lot of support. But it can't be just banging your head against the wall. You've got to believe that this can be done without breaking the federal budget. So that's when I said, okay, well, is there some way to affect the cost of space transport? And so I got together with a group of people over a series of Saturdays just to try to understand, is there something fundamentally super expensive about rockets, or can the cost be substantially improved? We had a bunch of those kind of brainstorming sessions, and I couldn't see any fundamental obstacle to improving the cost of rockets. So that's when I started SpaceX.
It's like, I'll just build them myself.
Yeah.
And then,
but like I said, at that point, I would say the probability of success was definitely less than 50%. I thought it would most likely not succeed, but it was worth a try.
But it's fascinating. The parallels are so many between these companies. It's, again, probability is low. Certainty that it needs to be done.
Yeah.
Certainty that it could be done by physics and first principles, that success is an option, right? It's one of the possibilities. And interestingly, starting with a Roadster and a Falcon 1 as a proof point to a larger design. As I look at the Falcon 9, and it looks like the product of a software engineer. Modular reuse, like let's build one engine and step and repeat, and building all kinds of elegance into the system design to abstract away, almost from the hardware into the software or into the design, the beauty of the system. And I wonder if that's why incumbents don't see the sort of re-engineering of the car or the rocket or the what have you. The Hyperloop is this, they don't approach it in that kind of blank sheet of paper. How would you do this if you didn't have to create jobs across districts or you didn't have some other ulterior motive? Interesting. Looking at the time, I'm going to ask one last question, but I'll give a heads up on if there's mics to start getting them ready for the audience, because I don't want to monopolize people's time here. Actually, there's so many questions I want to ask, but what I'll start with, maybe I'll try and end here for at least some of the quirky one about influences. So we've heard about the Iron Man reference and your childhood interest in comic books and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Asimov. But there's all kinds of things woven into like Cyberdyne Systems at SpaceX that we heard, and then some Easter eggs. So some of us noticed that the stereo goes to 11 on the Tesla. This is a Spinal Tap reference for those who know that this one goes to 11 and you need just one more.
It's louder than loud.
That's right.
Exactly.
That's right. But no one seems to have noticed the product lineup. So you got the Model S, you got the Model X.
Oh, yeah.
You've just trademarked the Model E.
Yeah.
No one's met anything.
You got to
and the Model
add
the Model Y.
Yeah.
Now, what's behind this?
I know, exactly. Well, I guess there's not a lot of humor in the trademark law, you know. Because, obviously we just trademarked sexy. And then we're having this discussion with Ford, because the Ford's council, they also didn't get it, because they're sort of slightly opposing us using Model E. And then they saw that we registered Model Y, and they said, "Oh, you're planning to use Model Y instead of Model E?" Like, no, it was just a joke.
Right, we don't do that.
I'm like, what does it spell? Come on.
Fantastic. Well, do we, I'll keep going if we don't, but do we have microphones for folks if they want to ask questions? Okay, let's do a quick, see if anyone, oh my gosh, yes, we have some. Why don't we do that? Let's take a couple questions from the audience. And I'll let you guys figure out how to do the allocations.
Thank you very much. I heard you talk about supersonic aircraft. You guys have done some beautiful work at SpaceX on VTOL. Clearly, Tesla is focused on electric. Have you thought about the synergies of electric and VTOL and aircraft for solving the 405 challenge?
For solving the 405 problem, well, I mean, I do think there's a
and
really
VTOL, vertical takeoff and landing.
Right. Sorry, vertical takeoff and landing is VTOL, I do think there's a really I think the optimal sort of air transport solution is a VTOL electric supersonic plane, and it actually works together quite well for a bunch of reasons. In particular, the higher you go, the better the more efficient the electric aircraft is. Whereas if you have a combustion aircraft, as you get higher, it tends to get worse because you have a kind of a fixed aperture and
air scoop.
Yeah, like the engine is the hole in the front of the engine is a fixed size, and so you have to pick a particular cruising altitude, and so you've got to figure out how do you get the right amount of air at sea level all the way through really high altitude. And then you've got this issue of supersonic combustion that so you end up having to slow the air down, and it ends up being not that efficient. But an electric aircraft would just get better and better as it got higher. And then electric motors have a higher power to weight ratio than a combustion engine, so you could actually have the power to do the vertical takeoff and landing part with a fairly small motor compared to combustion. And then you could get rid of the elevator and rudder, so you don't need the rear control surfaces if you gimbal the motor.
Gotcha. So it starts to look like a pod craft, like in Oblivion or something.
Right. So it's something not quite. The real trick of it is like how do you make it really long range and at least as safe as existing aircraft. Those are really the only two questions on that front, I think. But they're tricky. They're certainly tricky.
Don't underestimate those two questions. Great. Let's go to the next one, or whoever has a mic, however we're doing the allocation fairly and efficiently. Maybe give him a hand. Okay, no, that we have someone. Great.
Hi, Yan Gu, GSP 94. Hey, Steve.
Hi.
Long time no see. One question, is Tesla going to expand worldwide? And I think GSP is going to host China 2.0 tomorrow. And do you have any plans to go into the biggest car market today? But I know you were a little concerned through another friend of mine. I actually asked you indirectly a few years ago that you were concerned about the secret and the parroting in the Chinese market. Are you still concerned about that, or you have a strategy?
Yeah, so Tesla's definitely going to ship worldwide. In fact, the Tesla Roadster is in 31 countries right now, and we expect to ship the Model S to China starting next year, as well as to Japan and Hong Kong and Singapore and a number of other, and Australia. And so really, it's going to be quite widely distributed next year. Certainly, China is an extremely important market. In fact, for premium sedans, China is about half the world market for premium sedans. So if you take something
growing, right?
Yeah, if you take something like the Mercedes S-Class, but last year 54% of Mercedes S-Classes were sold in China. So a pretty important market. So we're going to definitely do a major push in China. And actually, some of the most enthusiastic potential customers we've seen are people from China. So we actually want to make sure that the car actually has features which are specific to the Chinese market, and make sure that it's not just taking an American product and just sort of sending it to China without any changes. So we want to make sure it's tailored to the market. Japan as well. I don't want to, not many American cars sell in Japan, but I think that would be like
good symbolism.
Yeah, I mean, like I think we should take the Japanese market seriously, and I think if we do things right, we should have reasonable sales there. So that's going to be next year. I mean, as far as copying stuff, I think that's certainly a risk. I think China's actually getting a lot better these days, and I think the new government is taking intellectual property a lot more seriously. So I'm actually starting to feel more and more confident about the technology not being copied in China, or at least it getting much better. And I don't think it's going to be too much of an issue until we want to establish local production, and that's where we need to make sure that we do it right, and there's not an incentive for the factory team that we established there to sort of go across the road and create a competing factory. But that concern is a few years away.
Great. Do we have another one? Oh, yeah.
Up here.
And the students are largely upstairs, is that
up
right?
Here.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Hi, Alan. This is Gabriel Parra, MBA student. First of all, thank you. It is very inspiring to hear an experience about actually, changing the world using organizations as the organization that you created. Hopefully, we will inspire another Iron Man movie as well. And I was wondering if you can tell us more about the experience about, how to balance, those trade-offs between your profits and, following purpose that goes further than just make money. You are trying to change the world, work for the humanity rather than just make profits in the short term.
So what was the question? I'm not sure if I got it.
How do you balance?
Okay, how do you balance? Sorry.
Well, I mean, first of all, I should say, with all of the companies, but I think particularly SpaceX and Tesla, although they're in a good position today, they went through some super tough times, and in fact, for SpaceX, I reserved capital to have 3 launch failures, or to withstand 2 launch failures and have the third one be a success, sort of 3 strikes. And actually, we had 3 launch failures. We were just able to scrape enough money together for a 4th flight that succeeded in 2008. And also in 2008, as Steve knows, we got the Tesla financing round done on the last hour of the last day. It was like 6 p.m., December 24th, 2008. And if we hadn't gotten it done then, the company would have gone bankrupt a few days after Christmas. So
what he's not mentioning
very
is
narrow.
The only reason that happened is he wrote a check for the remainder of his wealth to save the company during payroll and Christmas when no one else would. And Goldman had just failed the private offering, and the financial collapse was amongst us. There was no DOE loan. There was no Daimler deal. The car had a negative gross margin. It was not pretty. Oh, and you had your largest shareholder just completely pissed off and going AWOL.
Yeah.
It was ugly. Yeah. Yeah.
It was a stressful period.
And that was just at work. I mean,
yeah. So for a while, there really wasn't a question of profit or non-profit. It was like, we need to live. How do we live? So that was the main challenge. And now, I mean, now we're at the sort of the stage where we can say, okay, we can shift the dial between. We could make, let's say at this point, a medium amount of profit or a small amount. We've sort of chosen to make a small amount because we can reinvest the cash flow into future products. So now right now we're reinvesting the cash flow into developing the Model X, which is an SUV, and to increasing the production capacity of the factory, and doing a little bit of advanced planning on the third generation vehicle that'll be a mass market, sort of affordable, compelling electric car. So that's really, I guess, what's meant by, in this case, not pursuing. We're not trying to maximize profit at this point because it would constrain the business, the growth of the business, and constrain the overall objective of transitioning the world towards electric cars. So I got nothing against profit in general, but it's not. I mean, I actually don't think it's the smart move. I mean, if one were to take net present value of future cash flows, I think maximizing profit at this stage is actually not the smart move.
And it's interesting because earlier I said we'd get back to it. You mentioned that your goal was not to start a company that has the chance of making the most money for you the quickest, right?
Yeah.
And that the wealth personally is almost a byproduct of these activities of passion. And by analogy, like in the investment field in venture capital, you could look for the thing that'll make the most money the quickest, right? Like a new ad network for social media. But who cares? Right? Like, it really just doesn't help the world in any meaningful way. And there are if you take a longer term perspective, there are things you could do that don't answer the short term question of what's going to make me the most money this year or this 5-year period, but over 20 years. Focusing on those, ironically, he may make the most money, right, of any entrepreneur, or these companies might be more profitable than their cohort that doesn't follow that same purpose-driven kind of almost messianic zeal. So the balance question almost implies a dichotomy that may not be opposed, but may be aligned if you orchestrate it right.
Yeah, maybe more of a short-term versus long-term approach.
Yeah, exactly. Great. We have a hand up here.
Up here?
Another one up here? Sure.
Up here? This will be the last question.
Oh, is this the last question? Okay.
Yes, from your current car marketing strategy, you could say that your car is directed towards the luxury car marketplace, so that's a fairly well-defined market. Do you have any plans for expanding it to the general marketplace to, say, make a car for the masses, which might be maybe in the $25,000 to $35,000 range?
Yeah, absolutely.
Good question, then.
In fact, for the first blog piece I wrote for Tesla was the Tesla master plan, which is to start off with an expensive low-volume vehicle, then go to a mid-price, mid-volume, and then sort of low-price, high-volume. So we're kind of in phase 2, and with our third-generation vehicle, we expect to be somewhere in the $30,000 to $35,000 range for the car, which when you take into account the savings from the use of electricity instead of gasoline, is more like comparing it in the U.S. to about a $28,000 car, or in Europe to a $22,000 car.
And the maintenance is much less. The fuel costs are much lower.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's right. Well, great. Well, I want to thank you very much for this and transition to the closing segment of our evening. Thank you.
All right.
Well, Elon, congratulations on behalf of the Stanford Graduate School of Business and the Stanford Alumni Association, Business School Alumni Association. Dean Sloan would like to present you with this year's Entrepreneurial Company of the Year.
Really great.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
But when critics say you can't do this, your answer to them is,
we've done it.
He's done it in partnership with NASA, which has given SpaceX technical advice and a contract worth up to $1.6 billion. mostly for 12 cargo flights to the space station. But SpaceX's lack of experience bothers some NASA legends like Apollo astronauts Neil Armstrong and Gene Cernan. They've testified to Congress that the Obama administration's drive to commercialize space could compromise safety and eventually cost the taxpayers.
Now is the time to overrule this administration's pledge to mediocrity.
You know, there are American heroes who don't like this idea. Neil Armstrong, Gene Cernan have both testified against commercial spaceflight in the way that you're developing it, and I wonder what you think of that.
I was very sad to see that, because those guys are, those guys are heroes of mine, so it's really tough. I wish they would come and visit and see the hardware that we're doing here. And I think that would change their mind.
They inspired you to do this, didn't they?
Yes.
And to see them casting stones in your direction.
It's difficult.
Did you expect them to cheer you on?
So they're hoping they would.
What are you trying to prove to them?
What I'm trying to do is to make a significant difference in spaceflight and help